Hi, marketers. This is Dots, and welcome to the Marketing Leadership Podcast. With me here is Schneider, founder and lead producer at the Red Cup Agency. We will be discussing today the secrets to a fan obsessed podcast media production. So it's everything podcast production and more. You guys are ready? Let's do it. Lee, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on the show today. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
no worries. It's really an honor having you, and we're about to have some fun. But before then, you want to tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and you've done so well in podcasting. Tell us about it. I want to be like you when I grow up.
Well, I started the agency in about 2011, and my goal back then was the internet was people were figuring out digital marketing, and I was just doing straight up digital marketing, like pod placements for blogs and guest posts and social media feeds and a little bit of video and things like that. And I
Mm,
actually had the opportunity to get a consulting day with Pivotal, which Pivotal has been acquired by somebody and been acquired by someone else, but they were a kind of a think tank. And
mm,
they said, this is around 2010 or so, they said, you should try this thing called podcasting. You'd be good at it. And I have a deep background in lots of media stuff. I've been a writer for Good Morning America, a producer for
mm,
Dateline NBC. I've written a film or two for Disney. I've done a lot of television production, and I had all the gear, like literally hanging
wow.
around.
Yeah.
So I started podcasting. I started my own couple of podcasts just to see what it was like in the spare bedroom with the equipment that I had. And it was fun. And I started producing them for clients. I started with very simple conversational podcasts,
Mm,
kind of like this, Q&A
mm,
stuff.
mm,
And
mm,
then I went on to more narrative podcasts, storytelling podcasts. And now most of my work is for enterprise companies. uh, I do. I sign a lot of NDAs, so I can't name any names.
got it. Got it.
There's a few that I could talk about if we wanted to,
Mm,
but they're high level Q&A that sometimes are out on Apple Podcasts and all those kind of platforms, and sometimes not. Sometimes the company internally builds
oh,
their own thing, and
yeah.
that's where the podcast lives. And I've done for fun, I've done some audio dramas on my own, actors, directing, kind of harkening back to my early work in TV and films.
Mhm.
And that's been a lot of fun. I've used, synthetic voices and real voices and actors, and that's been more of a kind of a side hustle.
Mm.
And but the main podcasting thing has been narrative and conversational Q&A style podcasts for the past more than 10 years, really.
Wow, I like that specialization. At Content Allies, we do that for some people, but not a lot. And yeah, it's you get into situations where you're like, yeah, there is a difference, really. And I think anyone who is able to do narrative should be able to do the rapid fire non-narrative versions as well. So that's
Mhm.
really really great. And the fact that so it's all about storytelling, right? So I would probably poke your brain around what that storytelling angle, if you put it that way. Anybody can produce a podcast these days. Okay, almost anybody can produce a podcast these days. There are 5 million podcasts, so they are not enough
Mhm.
to say we are at the end of the world. But I think people can get around podcast production in a way. But what this episode is really about is producing podcasts in a way that it stands out and
Mhm.
connects to your desired audience. So do you have some sort of it could be a framework as well. We have a lot of guests on our episode and I love to consume their framework instead of having the time to create my own. So what does that production management process look like in a way whereby the podcast you do for them helps to strengthen their brand, helps to strengthen their storytelling style, and at the end get the most out of their audiences, which is going to be very very important in this decade when it comes to podcasting.
Yep. Well, the key thing is an obvious thing. It's a foundational thing, which is what do they really need this podcast to do? And I'll talk to clients about that. We have a development phase before I begin a podcast. We usually do minimum of 10 episodes to get started because I think you need a footprint.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll ask, well, what's this for? And the answers are different. Sometimes it's we need people to know the history of the company, or we need people to know how smart we are about cutting edge technology. So we're going to talk
And
about
so on.
all that cutting edge stuff. Or
Yeah.
we need people to know about mindfulness, and we want to invite, in the interest of diversity and representation, as many different kinds of people who are going to talk about mindfulness as we can: scientists, yogis, meditators, whoever it is. Those are all use cases that I've done. I've done a podcast for HP where they said we're going to tell people how to do some amazing, cutting edge, weird stuff, and we're going to talk to creators. And then there's going to be kind of another segment, a part two of each episode, where we tell you where to get the stuff, which happens to be HP equipment.
Mm.
So the structure is a lot of times driven by what they need. And I found when I do it, say, a narrative storytelling podcast, it's you might have an entertaining host read to kick it in and get to know the person. Then you may get into a real storytelling interview, an interview that you would start picturing almost in cinema where we're going in that story.
Yeah.
And then we would add all the effects and the background and take you there. That was a fun. I've done that a couple of times. We did that with a podcast called Same But Tech, where
Mm.
a fellow, say, would talk about being the guy who paid to go on the Russian space flight, paid millions. So you have countdowns in Russian, you have clips from NASA, and it as he's telling that story, and it's still a Q&A, but it's kind of an open Q&A,
Mm.
versus something that's more structured like a narrative, like a interview. So what that comes down to: part one, talk to the people, figure out what they need. Part two, let's plan these episodes, let's outline them. Let's give the guests an outline.
Yeah.
Let's figure out where we're going before we go there. And then, we could talk about remote production or studio production. I'm doing both and have
Wow.
done a lot of both,
Yeah.
and all over the world, really. But,
Wow.
once you get people in the chair, like, are they going to have a decent microphone like you and I have? Or
Mm-hmm.
do I have to send them one? Uh, do they have a good camera like you and I have or not?
Mm-hmm.
And the tolerances have gone up, meaning it's a bit harder. If you're going to post even on YouTube, you should be filming with a decent camera, and you should
Yeah.
have a good mic. It doesn't really
Yeah.
work anymore to just kind of wing it. And then we have the post production process depends again on what we need, but it has a few set things, which is I transcribe the whole thing
Mhm.
always.
Yeah.
I give the client an early look at what I call it a roadmap. This should be in, this should be out. We should have an
Yeah.
effect here. It's not quite
Yeah.
a script, but it's
Yeah.
getting there.
Yeah.
And then if we need to write a script, we write a script. Uh, I've been working. I know you use Descript, and don't use Descript for everything, but Descript has been really valuable in allowing me to step back and kind of see the whole structure of the thing, make test edits to give to clients like, oh, we talked for an hour, but you want to use
Mm.
just 20 minutes because people only listen in B2B to 20
20
minutes,
minutes. Yeah.
as you know. So here's what it would roughly sound like as a 20-minute cut down. Don't be
Mm.
shocked. It's rough, but this
Mm.
in Descript can do that. And I find
Mm.
myself doing that quite a bit. Uh, and then we have a pretty elaborate post-production process, depending mixes, sound effects, composers, stock music, depends on what they need. Uh, I think, it should sound great, and it should sound great whether you're listening on a good speaker, or it should sound great whether you're listening in the car
Yeah.
or out for a walk. And I have one mixer, my lead mixer. He won't release his mix to me until he plays it in the car. He says, I know we're on a tight deadline, but I got to go put this in the car and drive around and listen to it. because you got to be aware of, well, where's it going to be played and where are people going to
Yeah.
listen? YouTube, sure, someone's going to look at a screen and a desktop computer, but maybe not. Maybe they're
Mm.
looking at it, they're walking the dog and watching it on
On
the
the
phone.
mobile, yeah.
So I try to prepare for all of those things in the process. So we have something that's really kind of resilient. It can stand up it can take a beating in the real world. And some of my podcasts end up internally just with the company. So then I just hand off audio to
Wow.
them. Yeah.
But for those that are external, do you? I'm just curious about this. Do you just put it in all the 100 publishing platforms, or you try to focus on the top, I don't know, 10 or top 5?
Well, I use um, transistor.fm and Simplecast to load them up as their publishing platforms, and they
Mm,
pretty much automatically post everywhere.
mm,
But I know you probably look at stats, and when I look at stats, I see pretty quickly somebody's going to be on top with the lion's share. It's either going to be
yeah.
Spotify or it's going to be Apple, and Google YouTube is
Yeah, YouTube.
rapidly
Yeah,
coming
coming
up.
up. Yeah.
So yeah, sure, I post to all the other ones. Why not? SEO is SEO, but depending on the production values, depending on the topic,
Mm.
Apple's going to win, Spotify's going to win, or YouTube's going to win. And I try to focus my energies in all of those three, really.
Yeah, makes sense. We were speaking earlier about narrative versus non-narrative. For those who don't know what that is and think podcast is podcast, can you help us differentiate that? What makes a narrative episode, different from a non-narrative episode, and what are some of the scenarios to maybe help our listeners or viewers pick one?
Yeah. Well, everything's narrative. We'll never get away from that. We're creatures of narrative. I
Yeah.
teach a course for USC about media production in the School of Architecture. And that's one of the things that I'm blabbing on in almost every lecture. It's like, we're narrative creatures. We want a story. So if you're not going to impose a story on what you're doing, your listeners and viewers are imposing one anyway. They're
Yeah.
doing it for you. So why not create a story? So even in a Q&A, there's a story. You have to
Mm.
think about that. Introduction, surprise, a twist at the end, and a resolution. We're going to do that. So the non-narrative kind of winging it or just talking. The only thing you need there is a charismatic host. If you
Mm.
have a curious and charismatic host like you're good. The guests are sort of secondary in a way because guess who's in every show? You, the host.
Yeah.
So that's the key thing there. Period. The narrative is they may begin with an interview, but you're thinking like audio cinema. When
Mm.
your guest is talking, you're actually rolling in your mind. Okay, where am I? What does it sound like? Are they going up in space? Are they inventing a new kind of impossible burger? Like, what does that sound like? The sizzle of the burger. Are we in a test kitchen? Clang, clang.
Mm.
The
Mm.
sound of stuff hit. Chefs yelling at each other. And there's a lot of production there and a lot of tracks. That's the other thing that you think about with if we're doing this. You may have a music track. You have me on a track. You have you on a track. If you're genius, you have 5 tracks maybe, but in
Mm.
a narrative podcast we have 30 tracks. We
Wow.
have people talking, we have music, we have effects, we have underscore. We're kind of, and we're always playing with that. Sometimes the music bursts out on top and you're listening to music. It's like a movie really, but a
Wow.
movie for your ears, as the saying goes. And
And
I
there could be different tracks for different episodes, right?
Oh yeah, I mean
Wow.
there are templates. Look, you get
Mm.
crazy if you had to reinvent the wheel with every single episode. Like you get nuts.
Yeah.
It's more we have an opening, maybe you have a cold open, some interesting moment. We have a narrative, hi, I'm the host of this. You got to do
Mm.
that.
Mm.
We introduce a guest maybe, but then lots of things can happen. You could have storytelling segments and the host comes back in. solo as kind of a connective narrative piece, then you go
Yep.
back to the story or back, it's pretty open. And that's what makes it interesting and fun, because what you tune in for in that is you want to be transported. You want some kind of immersive storytelling where you go, wow, I just went into space or whatever it is. And that for me, there's a lot of fun because I'm a connoisseur of beeps and boops and alert sounds. And I will
Yeah.
spend a lot of time trying to find just the right sound of the door closing or the right sound of the beep. Or we've used Descript, and other platforms can do artificial voices, synthetic voices.
Yeah.
And
Once you type.
I've used them, not to take over the podcast, but if I need the sound of someone saying "Flight 36 boarding now," I'll make a Descript voice, and I'll put an echo on it, and I'll put some airport sound underneath, and you're in an
Mm,
airport. You're there.
yeah. Yeah.
So for me, it's, if I had to boil that long answer down, I'd say charismatic host, that's your Q&A, tons of tracks and immersive audio, that's your narrative.
Interesting. I think what I'm seeing right now for those trying to stand out is um, looking at the non-narratives and see how best can I make it. So we've seen companies do 1 minute skits on their
Mhm.
on regular episodes, not narrative at all. It's 1 minute. You have to do some acting and things like that, and then the episode starts. And I think that's a brilliant idea because people
Mhm.
drop off as early. So once you catch them with that skit, then they stay for longer. And there are many other things out there, but you're right. I think what you're doing is incredible. Sometimes, and to be able to systematize that is awesome as well, to
Mhm.
an extent, of course, and produce something, really, really great. Something else you are great with is host. In my experience, is just, we've worked on many podcasts. We had a bunch of internal podcasts, and I was going to get an MBA, and my boss asked me, why not just interview folks that are better than you instead of trying to get an MBA that will be obsolete by the time the MBA is completed. So, and that's exactly what I did. Almost 200 episodes now spoken. Everyone we've spoken to has had some level of experience greater than me. Respect to the juniors out there. I'm not saying you guys are not relevant as well, or I can't learn, but that was just the aim of the podcast. And just started, continuing to leverage my Nigerian talkativeness into the whole
Mhm.
thing, and just to see how it goes within the next, couple of minutes. So tell us, since you are a pro at, you know, coaching, or, helping hosts reach their potential, their interview skills, and so on. What are some of those hidden things that you found with all the hosts that you've helped so far? Like, what are some of those things that you probably wonder, why can't they get this? People should get this. I don't want to focus on the obvious stuff, but I want to focus on the very creative things. Like I do with every guest. Your job is to answer the question. My job is to crack the jokes. And if the guest says, "Oh, I'll crack it along with you," then we have a good episode. That is my own approach on the podcast. But there
Right.
are different other creative ways around that. So, what has been your experience with folks?
Well, there's two things bits of advice that I give almost everyone. One is you have to know about yourself to ask questions about someone else. So when I'm coaching people, I'll flip it around and make them answer
Mhm.
questions about themselves. Because a lot of times in an interview, there's going to be a little tidbit that you give as a host, and then people will give back. You share, they share. You did it yourself in the beginning before we were recording. You told me about yourself. So now I feel like I know you a little bit, and I feel more relaxed about sharing stuff about me. So people forget it's not all about pepper questions, bang, 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 bang. It's a back
Yeah.
and forth. And you got to be interesting. You have to have something to say, or else why would the person, give you the time of day? You have to be worth talking to.
Mm.
Be interesting is a dumb note, but be interesting, works. Be curious also works. The other weird thing I've discovered, and I've prepared network correspondence for interviews. I've done interviews for network TV. I've done, I don't know how many, hundreds and hundreds of interviews for the History Channel, Discovery.
Wow, I love history. That's my
Yeah,
third passion. So we'll see when
yeah.
I get to 40.
You'll
Anyway, go
see,
on. Sorry,
you'll
I
see
cut you
my
there.
credit sometimes still pops up. But, funny thing, people mirror you. So if you're smiling and ask the question with a smile in your question,
Mhm.
great, because people are going to come back with that. If you get grumpy and start to slouch, people are going to mirror you, which is a very strange thing, but very true. So if you want, it's kind of like coaching a performance out of the guest without actually saying you're doing that. But if you can provide them with something, if this sounds interesting, I sound interested in what you're saying, and you're interested in me, that's going to come across. There's a old thing when you do voiceovers, you tell people, okay, now smile, and then do the voiceover with a smile. And you can
Ah,
hear the smile. You can't see the smile, but you can hear the smile.
wow.
And sometimes I'll make people, if they're getting a little, say we're doing narration and they're getting a little, down, I'll say fake laugh. Go ha 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 ha, and then do the read. And they say you're crazy, and I say just try it, and it creates a kind of more energetic read.
Wow.
So those are just some of the interesting and strange things I've learned over the years of doing this and directing all these interviews.
Yeah, yeah. You have like a framework, like a process in all the very little things. Like all I had to do officially was to read the book The Articulate Executive. I don't know if you've heard about it before.
Mm.
And that was it. I just got on.
Mhm.
So but yeah, these are some of the nuances. And I think for any potential podcast host out there, it's important for you to discover some of these things that Lee is saying and discover other things for yourself as well. Even if it's outside the norm. Some of the other things outside the norm that I do, and you know a few people don't like but majority people like, is me giving my point of view. So which is what I'm
Mhm.
doing right now. Like I might spend a minute or two just giving my point of view on what you have said, and they're like, no, you listen to me. I'm like, but people love it. They love the fact that there is that back and forth, and it's not just what is your name, what did you do, thank you for
Mhm.
listening. And it's not that one-way traffic, as it were. Of course, I'm not perfect. I learn not to ask two questions at the same time so as not to confuse the guests. I learn to minimize interruptions and just nod instead. If you are watching, you'll probably see me demonstrating some of those things. But yeah, you can really see that, first of all, it takes, a lot of these steps to achieve perfection, but also whether you're remote or not, honestly, it doesn't matter what people think about you. I think a lot of people are scared, especially in the B2B side where, maybe a CEO or a CMO doesn't want to do it. Like, I don't want to
Mm.
do it. It's, but they're not telling you that they're shy. They're just saying, I don't have time for it, which is really where it comes from. But I'm just telling you that just do it. Just do the Nike slogan. Just do it. Pay close attention to some of these things that Lee had mentioned. And we'll be bringing his resource up as well. I have read that in detail leading up to this, and it has a lot of good stuff when it comes to making sure that you as a host are able to affect the production of a podcast to fandom, if I'll put it that way. And guys, this is how we do it on the podcast. It's not ended yet. I still have one more question for Lee, but uh, this episode is almost like Lee sharing how I can be better and me sharing my momentum on what
Mm.
a good podcast production looks like. So please share this episode, share it with your friend that is been trying to start a podcast for like 2 years now and will not push the button, and see if they will take the step. Before I get to that last question, Lee, it's the Dots Rapid Fire. And before that, I'm going to take a quick break from our sponsor. And when we come back, we will take the rest of the episodes. I'm leaving the best for the last, guys. So please don't go for that lunch yet, or that dinner, or that breakfast. It's just a couple of minutes more. I'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back, guys. Like I said, it's the Dots Rapid Fire. It's three questions as I have put Lee in the marketing court of law. Are you ready, sir?
I think I am.
Okay. I'm sure you'll be fine.
Maybe.
Uh, First question: what is your favorite marketing metric? And I don't want to hear sales or revenue.
I really like to look at the most listened to episode of a podcast, and I look at lifetime. I want to know who are the top 5 winning episodes of. Say we've done 6 seasons, or 5 or 1, because that really tells you the most about who the audience is.
Hmm. Do you, and this just made drilling further, do you look at the top 3 episodes per platform? Because as a strategist, I do KPIs every week, maybe 2 or 3. And you're often seeing the best episode on one platform is different from the best episode on another platform. What does that tell you when you do that kind of analysis?
Well, first of all, it tells you Spotify tends to be a slightly younger demographic, and that tells you that the podcast is reaching that group. And YouTube tends to be slightly younger still. So if that's the one, that gives you some intel about that. And you'll also, the other thing I will look at is how long people listen for the episode.
Consumption. Yeah.
Consumption is really valuable because you know whether you're wasting your time with an hour and a half podcast or whether you could do a perfectly good 30-minute one.
Yeah. That has been our lessons for this
Mhm.
podcast and some of the others I've managed. So that makes sense. Okay. Second question: how long do you use social media every day?
This is a pain point. I try for 15 minutes a day, and I've been using it basically for fun, as a break. I do
Mm,
post for clients and I do make a lot
yeah.
of social media assets for clients,
Yeah.
and I do check their stuff and see how it's doing.
Mm,
Uh, for clients, for me, since I do a lot of enterprise level podcasts, LinkedIn is the place where I'll probably burn half an hour on a non-average time, just seeing how all the posts are doing. But I've been using Mastodon a lot, and Blue Sky, and Threads, and Instagram. So it can eat up. 15 minutes is probably conservative average per day.
yeah, I mean, and you are probably in the top tier. We
Mhm.
1 hour is the most common one. Whenever we ask this question, we have seen a few 4 hours.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, maybe we've seen one 8 hour. That was like a salesperson, but yeah, the other average was is 4 hours. I personally function around the 1 hour mark for business purposes, but I use YouTube all day.
Mm,
It helps with the mindfulness thing. So yeah.
mm.
Okay, last question. What is your favorite marketing or business quote?
I really like what Kevin Kelly said a long time ago. You only need 1,000 true fans. He wrote that in around 2008, and it's kind of circulated around again. He's one of the founders of Wired magazine, and I found that to be totally true. Whether doing crowdfunding campaigns, or I launch a lot of podcasts from 0 followers, and everything, all the accounts are at 0. So I know when we reach 1,000 on any followers, subscribers, anything, we're winning. So I found that to be true. The 1,000 true fans will get you very far.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of consistency as well. As today, as we record, I'm not doing crazy numbers, even though I have crazy guests in the marketing space or podcasting space. But from some of the other internal podcasts that we've done, um, the break starts to happen as you approach 100 episodes live.
Mhm.
And the algorithm just shoots everything to thousands and tens of thousands. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so before I let you go, Lee, um, you mentioned something about consumption rate, so I thought I was going to take you up on that. Um, what's the impact on production in general? And let's make this as PhD level as possible. Aside from just making a podcast episode shorter, what are some of the things that you put in your podcast episodes that make sure people stick for as long as possible? We use a benchmark of 50%. It's not a secret. If you have any episode that people are able to get, to 50%, is great because everybody's busy. But how can we attain that and even do better on an episode from a production creative uh, innovation perspective?
Mm. Well, there's a lot of answers there, a lot of ways to look at it.
That's nice.
One is the creative is you need a hook and you need to refresh that hook every 5 minutes, reminding people why they're there or there's some interesting twist.
Mhm,
There's a friend of mine who did a podcast where he had segments, almost like a morning news show. And every 10 minutes, it was a long podcast, every 10 minutes, something new would come up and it would hook you again. So, from a creative standpoint, refreshing. And
mhm,
that can also mean a music break. Like I do a podcast now for mindfulness company and it's very deep stuff, it's meditation, it's life, it's karma, it's dharma, and I often put in a music break because it's, you need kind of a palate refresher there. So there's a 10-second little blip that helps you signal that you're going into a different part of the show and it kind of refreshes.
mhm,
The other production level thing is, you can't have distractions. So it means recording really good audio and a really good mix. You want that listener or viewer to just kind of get lost and forget about the time and forget
mhm,
how long they've devoted to this. So that means people have to have good microphones, good places to record, good mixes. Uh,
mhm.
there are some platforms, Adobe, Descript, where you can create studio audio out of people that don't have studio audio, and it's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I mean, it works better than not doing it.
yeah.
Uh, and I found sometimes if someone shows up and they're just in a really noisy place, I'll say, I think we should do this another time because there's too many distractions. We can hear the guy hammering, whatever it is. So that makes a big, big difference, I think. It's not just signaling professionalism, although of course it is.
Mm.
It's the immersive quality. You want people to just get lost in it and stay with it.
Yeah, yeah. It does. It's mandatory, is what I would say.
Hmm.
During the summer when I was having these interviews, I have a very dynamite daughter. She'll be 5 in March, and
Hmm.
she just busts in, "Daddy, see this?" I'm like, "Oh, Daddy's busy," and we have to cut that out and things like that. So you don't want your interview to be like the famous BBC interview where two of his
Right.
kids just busted in at the back, and that was all happening
Right.
live. So
Mhm.
having that clarity in your production from a basic perspective, and just be able to get the listener in there, and just just I'll steal your words there, getting lost into the conversation. Hopefully it's a well structured storytelling conversation. We cannot
Mhm.
stress that enough. And yeah, and it's also fun and educative at the same time. Podcasts should not be boring. Podcasts should be entertaining. Is one school of thought. Entertaining with some good wisdom out of it, which is something that here in this podcast we try to do. But anyways, you have been an amazing guest. Thank you for all the
Yeah.
unique insights that you've shown. I think the biggest learning for me is your storytelling experience and be able to tap into that. But I'm sure for somebody else watching or listening, it's probably something else. And if that's the case, it's good. So where can people follow you? Where can people learn more about you? Most especially, I will not forget, where can aspiring podcast hosts find you as well?
Yes, well, the website is redcupagency.com. And I do offer a coaching program. It's a month-long intensive for podcast hosts, established hosts who want to get better, and new hosts who are just getting into it. And I bring all my experience to bear that we've talked about here in that coaching session. It's a month. Well, on my handle became DocuGuy, DoCuguy. That's on Instagram, Mastodon, and I think I might even be that on LinkedIn. But you'll find me on all of those posting, mostly in social, LinkedIn, and Mastodon these days.
Mm, mm. Interesting, interesting. So there you go, guys. If you are watching, there's a bit of a visual cue there as well. But if you are listening, I think Lee was able to, spell some of those out too. Just look for Lee Schneider,
Right.
and I don't know if you're the only one bearing that, but you're probably the most popular. So
I am not the only one. I turn up at the top of search, but there's a bunch of us. But that's why DocuGuy came about for a while.
Okay.
But yeah, Lee Schneider usually, if you do Lee Schneider Red Cup, it'll certainly work.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, guys, it's the end of this episode. You're going to, enjoy more of this. It's at dotslovesmarketing.com. That's dotslovesmarketing.com. If you want to subscribe, even better. So just search Marketing Leadership on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I'd like to thank Desk Creek Content Allies and Listen Network for all their support. Till next time, guys, connect the dots.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Dots Loves Marketing. There will be links to any resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.